Views and news with Clarence Ford.
Share your perspective.
Only on Cape Talk.
Now it is that opportunity to interact with Dr. Chris Smith, the naked scientist. He's here to answer your questions. Welcome, Chris. Great to have you back.
Good morning. Now, look, I'm going to begin because we rushed through so I could get a gag in at the end of last week about ants. The lovely question about why ants appeared to be committing suicide. And in the aftermath, I realised we didn't actually really answer the question very well. So just to touch on that, so no one can say I didn't go back and do due diligence. The lady who said she's got ants committing suicide in her teacup, what she meant was there was water in there, the ants end up in the water and then they sink to the bottom of the cup. Why are they doing that? Well, I think it's because the way ants grip on surfaces, the legs of an ant have little pinchers at the end that they hook into the contours of surfaces to give them grip. Because most surfaces in nature are not perfectly smooth. There are lots of nooks and crannies that you can stick little pointy objects into to give you a toe hold, literally. Now, a ceramic cup has a really smooth surface. So when the ants get down there, they need to drink just like any other organism on Earth. They get thirsty. So they are attracted to water. And so they will go down for a drink and they will lose their footing, slip in and they can't get out, and then they will drown. And I think that's what's happening. It's a bit like a pitcher plant, those carnivorous plants that you see where they make a pitcher which fills with rainwater, and the inside of the pitcher is shaped so it's hard to get out again, but also the surface of the plant tissue is incredibly slippery. So again, the ants have no toehold, they fall in, and in that case the plant uses enzymes to break them down and eat them. It's the source of nitrogen for the plant because it grows in areas where the soil or opportunities to get nutrients is really poor. Well, this teacup I think is doing an equivalent of a pitcher plant for catching ants in the kitchen. Although she's presumably not going to eat her ants.
I think Tootie's going to appreciate that answer. Tootie, I think it was your question, was it not? The question about the kamikaze ads. So there's some meat there. Brian's on the line. Brian from Somerset West. Go ahead for the naked scientist.
Hi, Chris. A couple of years ago, we were talking about electric cars and the problems with batteries and storage. And you said scientists were working on a plan to actually energize water and put the water into like a fuel tank, utilize the water. When the water has used up all its charge, they pump it out or let it run into a tank at the garage, and then they would give you freshly charged water that is there, almost like petrol. Whatever happened to that idea? I've heard nothing about it.
Hi, Brian. Yeah, good memory. It wasn't water, it was an electrolyte. So it was a liquid. So a bit like water's a liquid, but it certainly wasn't water. It was actually a tungsten-based electrolyte. The person who was behind this work is Lee Cronin, Cronin. He is Regius Professor of Chemistry at the University of Glasgow. And he is still working on this. It's big business, the idea of having a charged electrolyte, and you can put energy into a cell by having an electrolyte which is in a pre-charged state. You put it into your battery, you then consume the charge in the electrolyte, drain out the depleted electrolyte and replace it. That concept hasn't gone away, but it's just one of many things on the table. There have been some other steps forward with improving the performance of batteries and battery technology. So this is very much a moving train, excuse the sort of slightly mixed metaphor there. This is still very much all cards are on the table. No one has taken anything off the table yet, but the difference between an idea and a concept in a chemistry laboratory and something you can roll out on the forecourt, that's a huge, great gulf that takes a long time to bridge that gap, because not only do you need to get the science and the technology right, you've then got to get the implementation in vehicles right and prove it safe, and then also get all the forecourt infrastructure to buy into this idea as well. And this is a bit like, at the moment, we've got electric cars, but for a few years, no one could agree on what shape plug to put on the charger. So we still have cars with multiple different charger types on them. You go to a charging station, there'll be one set for Tesla and another set for other types of cars. So I think there's a range of reasons why no one's adopted one specific solution and all got behind it, because the costs are incredibly high of implementation, and also, if we get it wrong and a better option comes along, how do you keep everything so it's retro-compatible?
Thank you for that question, Brian. We've got a voice note in. Let's take a listen.
Morning, Clarence and Dr. Chris. What causes an ulcer?
It depends what sort of ulcer we mean. Some ulcers occur in the mouth, mouth ulcers. They're commonly caused by herpes simplex virus, the cold sore virus, and it often does present with a quite painful, nasty ulcer, which can be on any part of your tongue or in your mouth, or sometimes blisters on the lips or around the mouth, and those can also crop up on other parts of the body. Those are probably the most common cause of recurrent ulcer. There are also other kinds of ulcers that you can get, particularly if you have vascular problems on your lower legs. People who with diabetes, for example, can get diabetic foot ulcers, which can either be because there's a lack of blood flow to that part of the body, or there's swelling in the tissue, venous insufficiency, and poor immune function and friable tissue, and it causes the leg skin to break down. I'm going to dwell on the first of those options, which is herpes simplex, and I'm going to speculate that this happens more frequently at certain times of our lives and at certain stages of our lives because the herpes virus lives in the nervous system for your entire life. There's the old saying, diamonds are forever, well, herpes is for life. Once you catch it, you've got it with you until the day you die because it stays in your nervous system. And it periodically comes out of your nervous system back into your tissue whenever your immune system becomes less good at controlling it. So if you have a low point, for instance, you become ill for some other reason, or you become immunosuppressed because doctors give you drugs, or you have a problem with nutrition, or you have a problem with advanced AIDS, for example, this can cause these viruses to come back to life. Now, what's the link to pregnancy? Well, pregnancy, because you are by definition tolerating a large amount of tissue which is genetically completely incompatible with you, because remember, a baby is 50% its mum, but 50% not its mum. So it's like me giving you an organ transplant with an organ that's 50% mismatched with you. So something special happens to a pregnant woman's immune system that dials down the response and enables it to tolerate having things there that it wouldn't normally tolerate. So there is a state of what we call functional immunosuppression in pregnancy. And as a result, a number of virus infections can be much, much worse in pregnancy than they otherwise would be for that person. Chickenpox can cause life-threatening chest infections in pregnancy. Hepatitis viruses can cause life-threatening liver damage in pregnancy, but not at other times of that person's life. And in some instances, herpes simplex, both orally but also genitally, can rear its ugly head during pregnancy because effectively your foot is taken off the immune brake for the period of pregnancy, and this gives the virus an opportunity to escape for a while.
Okay, then we've got a question in from Katlejo. Katlejo writes, I would like to ask Dr. Chris, there are bronze copper wrist rings that people usually wear and say they are used to relieve or release wrist pain. Can it really relieve pain, and how does it work?
The answer is people have done trials on this, and the only person whose health improves is the financial prospects of the person selling the thing to you, because it's a healthy helping of placebo effect. They've actually done a study, it was published in the British Medical Journal about 20 or 30 years ago, where they gave people these wristbands. Some of them were placebos. They looked like a real wristband that was supposed to be therapeutic. Others were the real deal. How they made a placebo one was, for instance, they had a magnet in one of them because it was a magnetic wristband and had all the usual claims for a magnetic effect. And the normal ones were what you would buy off the shelf. They compared these placebo ones with the ones off the shelf and rated people's self-reports for various things like function, pain, arthritis symptoms, and so on. They didn't detect any difference between the two, as you would expect. There's no reason why putting something on your arm that's a certain colour, a certain position, a certain pressure, a certain magnetic field should make any difference really whatsoever to that aspect of your health. That's not to say it doesn't change your behaviour. The placebo effect is incredibly powerful. About 30% of the pain-killing effect of a pill is the placebo effect. It's mind over matter. You're convinced this is going to help you, so it does. And the other thing that people have speculated is, well, if you've got some nice thing adorning one of your wrists, perhaps you're a bit more careful with your arm and you don't bash your arm about quite so much, or you're a bit more cautious with your movements. It might subtly change the way you move, and that might put slightly less stress on the thing and therefore disclose fewer symptoms when you're wearing it, and your brain then says, well, it must be the bracelet that's doing that. And so we have this wonderful thing where we attach significance to a coincidence. So the bottom line is clinically no evidence that these things make any difference, but they are jolly good for the person who sells them to you because they make a lot of money.
Alan Hurwitz sends in a question. Are probiotics good to take on an ongoing basis?
Hello, Alan. Well, first of all, what are probiotics? Probiotics are combinations of microorganisms in a viable live state. So they're living in the bottle and can grow. And the idea is when you consume these things, some make it past your stomach acid and stomach defences. They get into the intestine and they can support or reinforce, or in some cases replace, the microbiome that is in your intestine and therefore contribute to a healthier microbial flora. In other words, bacterial makeup inside the body, which we know is consistent with good health. Now, there's a range of reasons why your microbiome can get perturbed. If you have certain chronic diseases, if you have certain bowel problems, such as inflammatory bowel disease, if you take big doses of antibiotics or you're chronically taking big doses of antibiotics because you are at high risk of infection, you have an immune problem, you have a wound infection that needs long-term antibiotic management, for example, you can punch holes in your normal microbiome. This distortion then lays you open to infection and colonization by a raft of other things you don't want living inside you, and that can contribute to ill health. So, some people argue that taking these probiotics can help to reinforce what should be there, support the things that still are there, and therefore overall improve health. And there is some data to suggest that that is the case under certain circumstances. So you can use these things, you can use them regularly. The manufacturers would love you to use them regularly, but it's not always necessary because remember, the microbiome in a healthy person across most of their life is a very rock solid, stable thing, and it's largely selected by what you put in your mouth that isn't a probiotic. It's what you put in your mouth in the way of food, because the food has what we call a prebiotic effect. The food feeds the microbiome and makes certain populations of microbes flourish, and it suppresses the growths of others, which is why a healthy diet actually leads to better health overall because it reinforces a healthy microbiome. But you can support that under certain circumstances by using these probiotics. It won't do you any harm, but again, it is costly, and the person whose health will definitely improve is the owner of the company that's selling you the probiotics.
A question in from Cheryl. Good day, Dr. Chris. My husband has a duodenal ulcer. Why does his chest feel tight? He's on meds for duodenal, but has had an awful attack with severe pain.
Well, duodenal ulcers, the duodenum is the first 12 inches, hence the name duodenum, because that's 12 in Latin, the first 12 inches of the small intestine. It's the bit where, when the stomach opens, it opens into the duodenum, and that then goes on to the jejunum, which then goes on to the ileum, the next bit of the small intestine. And ulcers there are common, because that tissue sees the very powerful acid that comes out from the stomach once you squirt your stomach acid or stomach contents out down your small bowel. So those are common sites, and they're often linked, in fact, to infection with the bacterial infection Helicobacter pylori, discovered by the Nobel Prize winner in Western Australia, Barry Marshall. And that presents in exactly the same way as a stomach ulcer, because the tissue is very close together. You generally have pain, especially when you're hungry, and when you have an empty stomach, the acid has nothing to chew on, and it therefore attacks the lining of the stomach and the small intestine, and it attacks sensitive tissue which is not protected by an overlying layer because it's been ulcerated, or mucus, and it's extremely painful. And the pain can refer to other regions in the abdomen, because unlike my fingertips, where I need to reach into my pocket and find the right key to open the door, I don't need to do that with the intestines inside me. They just need a vague idea as to when something's not tickety-boo. So your intestines have what's called visceral innervation, and this means when they sense pain, it tends to be referred to a wider area, not just to one specific part of the intestine, because there'd be no benefit to knowing exactly where, generally speaking, something's feeling a bit uncomfortable. So as a result, pain from the abdominal viscera can be referred to a range of different places, and often that's quite a broad area. So it's not unusual to feel pain if you have things going on in the stomach up in the chest. But be very careful, because of course the other thing that can happen in the chest that is painful, you have your heart there. The heart also can have problems. You can have a heart attack because of a lack of blood flow down your coronary arteries, and this too tends to produce vague, poorly localizing pain that is in the chest but can also go up into the neck, down your arm. So make sure you're not confusing, and you don't say anything in this question about cardiac problems. Make sure you're not saying, oh, it's just my ulcer pain, and ignoring a heart problem. So if this happens and it's a bit different, or that it's happening more all of a sudden, that needs investigating and needs proper management. So do not ignore those sorts of chest pains thinking it's just an ulcer. It might not be on one occasion, and you need some help. So make sure you take these things seriously.
Okay, Joe, let's go to Heidi.
My cat has diabetes, which is very difficult to control. And now the vet suspects it might be because of a brain tumor. Please explain that one to me.
Well, in your brain, you have a pituitary gland. This is a tiny little thing. It's about the size of the nail on the end of your small finger. It dangles down off the bottom of your hypothalamus, and it's the master endocrine organ in the body. The front part of it secretes hormones that go down in the bloodstream and control lots of things like growth, thyroid function, stress hormones, etc. The back part of the pituitary gland secretes an incredibly important hormone called antidiuretic hormone, ADH, also known as arginine vasopressin. This is secreted by the brain in response to how dilute the blood is. So the brain is tasting how salty our blood is all the time. If it detects that the blood is becoming too dilute, or more dilute accordingly, it changes the level of this antidiuretic hormone, which, as the name suggests, goes to the kidney and tells the kidney to produce either more or less urine accordingly. Antidiuresis. Diuresis means making urine. Antidiuresis means don't make any urine. So if you don't have enough antidiuretic hormone, you will generate copious quantities of urine. You'll have diabetes insipidus, and as a result of that, you'll be going to the wee all the time. And this may be what's gone on if there's a tumour which has damaged the ability of that part of the nervous system to produce the hormones in response to the right signals. It can produce spurious signals or no signals, and that will affect urine flow, which might account for the diabetes insipidus and the large volumes of urine. Tumours in the pituitary are quite common.
Yeah, we're gonna have to wrap it there. Big thank you, Dr. Chris Smith, lecturer at the University of Cambridge, our very own Naked Scientist. That appointment every Friday just after 9:30, and I can promise you it's only a fraction of the questions that we've been able to get to today. Apologies. I'm sure there's a lot of people waiting patiently for an answer to their question today. We'll see what we can roll over to next week. But it is time for news. It comes your way at the top of the hour with Natalie Malchus.